As national new cases topped 130,000 today, numerous states reported deaths with a sad new record for New South Wales. The state's hospitalisations have also shot past 2,500 as 184 people fight for their lives in ICUs. But Premier Dom Perrottet says there is a silver lining.
Whilst the health system is under pressure, and our health teams are doing an amazing job, we are currently tracking at both an ICU and hospitalisation rate here in New South Wales better than the best case scenario. So that is encouraging, reassuring and pleasing.
He's referring to modelling released last week that in its best case scenario showed New South Wales would have 3,158 hospitalisations and 270 people in ICU by mid-January, well above the reality today.
It's obviously very pleasing for us to see the actuals on that modelling graph track below the most optimistic prediction that we presented to you last week.
It's pretty clear by now that Omicron is less likely to make you seriously ill than Delta. These better than predicted numbers could give hope to other states who are currently tracking behind New South Wales in their Omicron wave, especially if this prediction from the CMO yesterday,
they are close to peaking if not already,
turns out to be correct. So are we looking at the worst Omicron can throw at us, and when does it start getting better?
Well, Professor Tony Blakely is something of a model specimen himself, and he joins us now. Tony, you've taken Dominic Perrottet's modelling and run some of your own for us. Has he got it right, do you think?
Yeah. So if I look at the percentage change each day and extrapolate that out, I see a peak of a little bit less than 3,000 people in hospital on any given day. And that peak happening between the 20th and the 26th of January. So we agree. The curve's got to a point where it's getting reasonably easy to predict what it's going to do. So that's good news. It's not the ideal number of hospitalisations for New South Wales, but certainly better than the medium and worst case scenarios that were being put on the table a week ago.
The tragic news today, of course, was the number of deaths in New South Wales. Do we know how many of those deaths would have come about after people have had Delta and how many would have had Omicron?
Yeah, it's an interesting and important question. Tony Cunningham from Westmead Hospital and I were banging back emails in the last 24 hours. So here's some numbers from Tony Cunningham. Probably 60% of people in ICU in the hospitals that can get the test are Omicron, which means 40% are Delta, and about 2/3 across the whole New South Wales are Omicron. And what that means is by the time you get to those who died, probably about half of them are Delta. So even though Delta is probably only 2 to 3% of all the infections out there in the community, including the asymptomatic, all the mild infections, because it's so much more severe at every point of the process, your chance of going from asymptomatic to symptomatic, your chance of going from symptomatic to severe, the chance of severe going to hospital, the chance of hospital going to ICU, chance of ICU goes up. Every point along the way, Delta's worse than Omicron. So we go from 2 to 3% of all the infections in the population only being Delta through to perhaps half of the deaths being Delta.
And what about all the states that are tracking, I guess, a bit behind New South Wales? Is it reasonable to expect that they'll be facing similar levels of hospitalisation?
Yeah, probably. I've been trying to model out Victoria as well, and I'm finding that hard to get a read because the curve hasn't quite started to bend onto its plateau. But it's looking like something like 1,800, 2,000 peak, I think, in about 2 weeks' time. Now, interesting exception there is ACT. They've already got their hospitalisations pretty flat for the last week, and they're only coming in at 20% of the rate per people in ACT compared to New South Wales. So they're doing something very well. They're either controlling the infections in the population or they're doing at-home care so much better, but they're not having to get as many people in hospital. But as a general rule of thumb, we can expect, yes, to see echoes in the remaining states and territories of a similar hospitalisation rates. I'm hoping that the Northern Territories and then WA learn from our muck up on the East Coast and flatten that curve. They might see a longer epidemic, but lower rates in hospitals. That's what I'm hoping we'll see in Northern Territories and WA.
Professor, there'd be so many people around the country who are just nervously watching those numbers go up and up and up every day and feeling anxious and uptight. I mean, is there a point when the nation can relax its collective butt cheeks? When's that going to happen?
Well, actually, so let's forecast that. So we're forecasting the butt cheek relaxation phenomena.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to happen in New South Wales in about 3 weeks, and in Victoria in about 4 to 5 weeks, and in ACT maybe sooner, and perhaps in WA, well, we just don't know what they're doing. It's another game, right?
I love that you kept a straight face through all of that, Tony. Thanks so much for your time. Always really appreciate your insight.
Pleasure. I hope it was useful.